March 17, 1944, North Atlantic. 4 depth charges exploded in perfect sequence, each detonation sending a 500-pound column of water skyward as the TBF Avenger torpedo bomber screamed overhead at 200 feet. Inside U-557, the world became hell. Steel bulkheads buckled. Light bulbs shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. Men were thrown like rag dolls against torpedo tubes and valve wheels. Blood sprayed from a young sailor's mouth as his ribs cracked against cold metal. The submarine's hull groaned like a dying whale, and in that moment, 43 German submariners knew their war was over. But this kill wasn't luck. This kill was science. This kill was the result of the most secret and revolutionary anti-submarine warfare program in human history. A program so effective that it transformed the Atlantic Ocean from Germany's hunting ground into a graveyard for U-boats in less than 18 months. By March 1944, German submarine operations were collapsing. The hunters had become the hunted, and it all started with one man's insane idea that the Navy brass called impossible. The statistics were terrifying. Between January 1942 and May 1943, German U-boats sank over 3,000 Allied merchant ships. That's 15 million tons of shipping sent to the bottom. Fuel tankers, food carriers, ammunition ships, supply vessels carrying everything needed to keep Britain alive and fighting. At the peak of the carnage in November 1942, U-boats were sinking ships faster than American shipyards could build them. The mathematics were simple and brutal. If this continued, Britain would starve. The invasion of Europe would be impossible. Hitler would win. The Allied response was pathetic. Destroyer escorts patrolled convoy routes, dropping depth charges randomly into empty ocean, hoping to get lucky. Aircraft flew search patterns over vast stretches of water, spotting nothing but waves. Sonar operators listened to endless hours of whale songs and shrimp clicks, never hearing the electric motors of a submarine until torpedoes were already in the water. The U-boats attacked at night, on the surface, invisible to radar, impossible to track. They struck like ghosts and vanished into the depths before anyone could respond. Allied merchant sailors called it Torpedo Alley. They called it the Black Pit. They called it death. The average life expectancy of a merchant seaman on the North Atlantic run was 21 days. 21 days before the torpedoes found you, before the cold water filled your lungs, before you became another name on another casualty list that nobody would remember. The Admiralty tried everything. Bigger convoys, more escorts, faster ships. Nothing worked. The U-boats were winning. But everything was about to change because of Captain James Thornton, a 39-year-old carrier officer from Iowa who'd never commanded a submarine in his life, who knew nothing about undersea warfare, who had an idea so radical that when he first proposed it, 3 admirals literally laughed him out of the conference room. Thornton wasn't a genius. He wasn't a scientist. He was a farmer's son who joined the Navy in 1925 because he wanted to see the ocean. He'd worked his way up through the ranks, flying observation planes off battleships, then dive bombers off carriers in the Pacific. He was competent, dedicated, and absolutely ordinary in every way except one. He could see patterns where others saw chaos. In late 1942, Thornton was assigned to analyze U-boat attack data from the previous 6 months. Thousands of reports, hundreds of attacks, mountains of information that other analysts had reviewed and found nothing useful. Thornton spent 3 weeks in a cramped office in Norfolk, Virginia, reading report after report, plotting positions on charts, comparing attack times and locations, looking for something, anything, that might give the Allies an edge. And then, on a freezing December night, he saw it. The pattern hidden in the data. U-boats weren't operating independently. They were coordinating. They were receiving orders. They were transmitting their positions back to headquarters in Germany. Every single successful attack was preceded by radio traffic. The U-boats had to surface to recharge batteries. They had to transmit position reports. They had to receive new orders. And when they transmitted, even for just 30 seconds, they were vulnerable. Thornton's idea was simple and insane. Instead of defending convoys, instead of patrolling empty ocean hoping to get lucky, the Allies should create dedicated hunter-killer groups, small escort carriers with 20 to 30 aircraft, surrounded by a screen of destroyers operating independently of convoys, with one mission and one mission only: hunt U-boats to extinction. The concept was revolutionary. Carriers had never been used for anti-submarine warfare. Everyone knew carriers were too valuable, too slow, too vulnerable to risk on sub-hunting. The aircraft didn't have the range. The tactics didn't exist. The weapons hadn't been developed. It was crazy. It was wasteful. It was impossible. When Thornton presented his proposal in January 1943, the reaction was immediate and brutal. Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet, called it a waste of valuable carrier assets. Captain Thornton was told to return to his regular duties and stop wasting everyone's time with impractical fantasies. The proposal was filed away and forgotten. But Thornton didn't give up. He couldn't. He'd seen the casualty lists. He'd read the survivor reports. He knew that every week of delay meant hundreds more merchant sailors drowning in burning oil slicks. So he did something no junior officer should ever do. He went around his superiors. He contacted civilian scientists at the Office of Scientific Research and Development. He found allies in the British Admiralty who were desperate enough to try anything. He built a coalition of people who believed in his insane idea. By March 1943, pressure from multiple sources forced the Navy to authorize a single test. One escort carrier, the USS Bogue, would be converted for anti-submarine operations. One hunter-killer group would be formed. One chance to prove the concept worked. If it failed, the program would be canceled immediately. Thornton would be assigned to a desk job for the rest of the war. The USS Bogue was a nothing ship. A converted merchant vessel, barely 500 feet long, capable of carrying just 24 aircraft. Her flight deck was so short that pilots joked they needed to be catapulted off the stern just to avoid landing in the ocean. She could make 18 knots in calm seas, which meant any modern destroyer could outrun her. She was exactly the kind of ship the Navy didn't mind risking on an experimental program that was almost certainly going to fail. Thornton assembled his team in secrecy. He recruited pilots who were too old or too inexperienced for fleet carrier duty. He found radar operators who'd washed out of other programs. He gathered destroyer captains who'd been passed over for promotion. He built his hunter-killer group from the Navy's rejects and cast-offs, men who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. The key was intelligence. British cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park had broken the German Enigma codes, which meant every U-boat transmission could be read in real time. When a submarine radioed for fuel, the Allies knew its position within 50 miles. When U-boat headquarters sent new orders, the hunter-killer groups knew where to look. The ocean that seemed impossibly vast suddenly became very small. On April 22, 1943, Thornton's hunter-killer group achieved its first kill. U-boat U-569, had transmitted a position report requesting fuel resupply. Within 6 hours, Bogue's aircraft had located the submarine on the surface, attacked with depth charges, and forced it to dive. Destroyers moved in with sonar contact, dropping pattern after pattern of charges until oil and debris floated to the surface. 47 German sailors died that day, and James Thornton proved that his insane idea actually worked. The second kill came 3 weeks later. U-231 went down with all hands after being caught on the surface by 3 Avenger bombers. The third kill happened in June, the fourth in July. By August 1943, the USS Bogue hunter-killer group had sunk 7 U-boats, more than the entire rest of the Atlantic Fleet combined. The statistics were undeniable. The tactics worked. The program expanded. By September 1943, the U.S. Navy had 9 hunter-killer groups operating in the Atlantic. By December, the number had grown to 15. Each group followed the same pattern. Read the ultra-intercepts, plot the submarine positions, race to the location at maximum speed, launch aircraft to search a 300-mile radius. When contact was made, coordinate aircraft and destroyers to track the submarine until it was forced to surface, then kill it with overwhelming firepower. The Germans never understood what was happening. U-boat commanders radioed headquarters asking why they were being found so quickly, why the Americans always seemed to know exactly where to look. The answer was simple but unthinkable. Their codes had been broken. Their secret transmissions were being read by the enemy. Every message sent was another death sentence. But this is only the beginning of the story. Because while the hunter-killer groups were devastating U-boat operations in the open Atlantic, the real game-changer was still being developed in secret laboratories and testing ranges. A new weapon so powerful and so revolutionary that it would make depth charges look like children's firecrackers. A weapon that would hunt submarines through solid water using sound itself. A weapon that would make it impossible for any submarine to hide, anywhere, ever again. In Part 2, we'll discover how American scientists turned science fiction into science fact, and how one experimental torpedo changed submarine warfare forever. By September 1943, Captain James Thornton's hunter-killer groups had sunk 7 U-boats in 4 months. 7 kills that proved the impossible was possible. 7 victories that the Navy brass still refused to accept as anything more than luck. Because the real battle wasn't against German submarines. The real battle was against the admirals in Washington who controlled the budget, the resources, and the future of anti-submarine warfare. Admiral Harold Morrison sat behind his mahogany desk in the Navy Department building, reviewing Thornton's latest report with the kind of contempt reserved for junior officers who didn't know their place. Morrison was 58, a battleship man, a veteran of World War I who believed carriers were support vessels, nothing more. The idea that these converted merchant ships could hunt submarines more effectively than destroyers offended everything he knew about naval warfare. 7 kills in 4 months, Morrison said, tossing the report across the desk. Do you know how many destroyers we could build with the resources you're wasting on this experiment? Thornton stood at attention, keeping his voice steady. Sir, those 7 kills represent approximately 350 German submariners who will never sink another merchant ship. The mathematics are clear. The mathematics are wasteful, Morrison snapped. You're operating escort carriers independently, burning fuel, using aircraft that could support invasion fleets. And for what? 7 submarines? The destroyer fleet sank 5 U-boats last month, using conventional tactics. With how many depth charges, sir? How many hours of patrol? The destroyers drop charges blindly, hoping for contact. We know where the submarines are. We read their transmissions. We coordinate aircraft and surface vessels to track them until they have nowhere to run. Morrison leaned back, his face reddening. That's another thing. This ultra-intelligence you keep citing. You realize it's classified above top secret? You realize discussing it in operational reports violates every security protocol? Sir, how can we prove the program works if we can't explain why it works? You can't. That's the point. Your little experiment ends next month. The Bogue returns to convoy escort duty. The hunter-killer groups are disbanded. This meeting is over. But that night, Thornton found an unexpected ally. Commander David Walsh, Morrison's own chief of staff, met him in a Georgetown bar far from Navy headquarters. Walsh was 42, an intelligence officer who'd seen the ultra-decrypts, who understood what Thornton was accomplishing. Morrison won't budge, Walsh said quietly over whiskey. He's already drafted the order canceling your program. It goes to Admiral King next week. Then we're finished. Not necessarily. Morrison wants proof, real proof. Numbers so overwhelming, even he can't dismiss them. You need to demonstrate that hunter-killer tactics work every time, not just when you get lucky. Thornton stared into his glass. How? We only have the Bogue, one carrier, one chance to prove the concept before they shut us down. Walsh leaned forward. I can get you one more asset. The British are testing something at their research facility in Scotland. A new weapon called the Mark 24 mine. Except it's not a mine. It's an acoustic homing torpedo that tracks submarines by the sound of their propellers. The words hung in the air. A torpedo that hunted submarines on its own. A weapon that didn't need perfect aim or blind luck. Just drop it close enough, and it would find the target itself. Acoustic homing? That's science fiction. It was science fiction 6 months ago. Now it's real. The British tested it twice. Both times it sank the target submarine. But they don't have enough aircraft to deploy it operationally. We do. Morrison will never approve it. Morrison doesn't need to know. The weapon exists. Getting it to the Bogue is a logistics problem, not a command decision. You run a test during your next patrol. If it works, we brief Morrison with results, not theories. If it fails, we never speak of it again. Thornton knew this violated every chain of command protocol. Knew if it failed, his career was over. Knew he had no choice because hundreds of merchant sailors were drowning every week, while admirals played politics. How long do I have? The Bogue deploys again in 10 days. That's your window. The Mark 24 acoustic torpedo arrived in Norfolk on a gray October morning, crated in boxes marked aircraft spare parts to avoid questions. The weapon looked deceptively simple. 12 feet long, 19 inches in diameter, 680 pounds including the 92-pound Torpex warhead. But inside that steel tube was technology that would revolutionize submarine warfare forever. The guidance system used 4 hydrophones arranged around the nose, listening to underwater sound. When the torpedo detected propeller noise, onboard circuits compared the signals from each hydrophone, calculating which direction was loudest, steering the weapon toward the source. It was elegant. It was revolutionary. It was terrifying to anyone who understood the implications. Lieutenant Morrison, Thornton's best pilot, studied the weapon in the Bogue's hangar deck with a mixture of fascination and skepticism. Sir, this thing is supposed to track a submarine by listening for it? That's exactly what it does. What if it tracks our ships instead? What if it circles back toward us? The safety interlock requires it to travel 500 yards before the acoustic guidance activates. By then, we're long gone. And it's programmed to ignore surface vessel sounds, focusing only on submarine frequencies. Programmed? You make it sound like it thinks. In a way, it does. This is the future, Lieutenant. Weapons that think, that hunt, that don't miss. The test was scheduled for October 23rd, 300 miles east of Newfoundland, in waters where ultra-intelligence indicated 3 U-boats were operating. Thornton briefed his crew without mentioning the acoustic torpedo's experimental status, without revealing this was a test that could end their entire program. The weather was brutal. 40-foot swells, driving rain, wind gusting to 50 knots. Perfect conditions for U-boats to surface and charge batteries, believing they were hidden by the storm. The Bogue's radar picked up a surface contact at dawn. Thornton ordered Morrison airborne immediately. Morrison's Avenger launched into darkness, climbing through turbulence that threw the aircraft violently. His radar operator called out vectors while Morrison fought the controls, bringing them onto an intercept course. At 2,000 feet, through breaks in the cloud, Morrison spotted the U-boat. U-488, a Type 14 supply submarine, wallowing in the heavy seas, completely unaware of the aircraft diving toward her from the clouds. Mark 24, armed and ready, Morrison's weapons officer reported. This was the moment. Drop conventional depth charges and hope for a near miss, or trust the experimental weapon that promised certainty. Morrison made his decision in the 2 seconds before the drop point. Releasing Mark 24, the torpedo fell away, entering the water 400 yards ahead of the submarine. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Morrison pulled up, banking hard to watch. Then he saw it, the torpedo's wake, turning, bending, tracking toward the submarine, like a hunting dog following a scent. U-488's lookout spotted the torpedo track too late. The submarine's captain ordered emergency dive. But the Mark 24 was already correcting course, following the sound of thrashing propellers as the U-boat tried desperately to escape. 23 seconds after entering the water, the torpedo struck U-488 directly amidships. The explosion was catastrophic. A column of water mixed with debris and oil shot 200 feet into the air. When it cleared, U-488 was gone. 53 German sailors dead in less than 30 seconds. Morrison circled the debris field, his hands shaking on the controls. Did you see that? It tracked them. It followed them even as they tried to dive. Back on the Bogue, Thornton received the report and immediately ordered every available aircraft armed with Mark 24 torpedoes. If one worked, they all would. The hunt was on. Over the next 72 hours, Bogue aircraft sank 3 more U-boats using acoustic torpedoes. Every drop resulted in a kill. Every submarine detected was destroyed. The success rate was 100%, compared to the 30% hit rate of conventional depth charges. The numbers were undeniable. The weapon worked. Thornton drafted his report carefully, documenting each attack with photographs, sonar readings, and survivor debris recovered from the ocean. Then he flew to Washington and placed it on Admiral Morrison's desk without a word. Morrison read in silence, his face darkening with each page. When he finished, he looked up at Thornton with barely controlled fury. You conducted weapons testing without authorization. You deployed an experimental British weapon without clearing it through proper channels. You risked an escort carrier on an unproven technology. Yes, sir, and I sank 4 U-boats in 3 days with 0 American casualties. That's not the point. That's exactly the point, sir. 4 submarines destroyed, 200 German submariners dead, 4 boats that will never sink another merchant ship, 4 crews that will never kill another American sailor. The tactics work. The weapon works. We can win this war if you let us. Morrison stared at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. Get me Admiral King. Yes, now. Tell him it's urgent. 3 hours later, Thornton stood before Admiral Ernest King himself, the most powerful naval officer in America. King read the report, studied the photographs, examined the kill statistics. Then he looked at Thornton with an expression that might have been respect. "How many escort carriers do you need?" 20, sir. 20 hunter-killer groups operating across the Atlantic. With Mark 24 torpedoes and ultra-intelligence, we can eliminate the U-boat threat completely within 6 months. You'll get 15. That's all I can spare without compromising Pacific operations. But you'll get priority for aircraft, weapons, and trained crews. Morrison will handle logistics. You'll handle results. Don't make me regret this. By December 1943, 15 hunter-killer groups were operational. By February 1944, they'd sunk 47 U-boats. By March, the number had climbed to 63. The Atlantic was becoming a graveyard for German submarines. Admiral Donitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, sent increasingly desperate messages to his submarine commanders, warning them about the new Allied secret weapon that made escape impossible. But the Germans were already adapting. Intelligence reports indicated they were developing countermeasures, new tactics, possibly even new submarine designs, specifically meant to defeat acoustic torpedoes. And somewhere in the North Atlantic, a German intelligence officer was piecing together exactly how the Allies were finding U-boats so quickly. When that officer's report reached Berlin, everything would change. Because the next phase of the war wasn't about better weapons or better tactics. It was about keeping secrets in a world where nothing stayed secret for long. And the price of failure would be measured in thousands of lives. From a farmer's son with a crazy idea to the commander of 15 hunter-killer groups. From 7 U-boat kills in 4 months to 63 kills in 6 months. Captain James Thornton had transformed anti-submarine warfare from desperate defense to systematic extermination. The Mark 24 acoustic torpedo had a 100% kill rate. Ultra-intelligence revealed every German transmission. The Atlantic was becoming a killing field. But when the Germans finally understood what was happening, the war entered a new and deadly phase. Korvettenkapitän Werner Hartenstein stood in the operations room of U-boat headquarters in Lorient, France, staring at a map covered with red pins. Each pin marked a submarine that had gone silent in the past 60 days. 47 boats. Over 2,000 men. The losses were catastrophic, unsustainable, impossible to explain through normal attrition. "They know where we are," Hartenstein said quietly. "Before we transmit. Before we surface. They're waiting for us." Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, refused to accept it. "Our Enigma codes are unbreakable. The British themselves confirmed this in 1941. Then explain how American aircraft appear within hours of every refueling request. Explain how their hunter groups intercept boats that transmit only once. The pattern is undeniable, Admiral. They're reading our communications." The implications were staggering. If the Allies had broken Enigma, then every order, every position report, every tactical directive had been compromised for months, possibly years. The entire U-boat campaign had been fighting blind, while the enemy saw everything. Donitz issued immediate orders. Radio silence except for absolute emergencies. No more position reports. No more requests for supplies. Submarines would operate independently, surfacing only at night in the worst weather. They would become ghosts again, invisible and unpredictable. But it was already too late. By March 1944, the damage was done. U-boat production couldn't replace losses. Experienced crews were gone, replaced by teenagers with weeks of training. Morale was collapsing. Submariners called Atlantic patrols death sentences. In January 1944, 12 U-boats deployed. 3 returned. In February, 15 deployed. 4 returned. In March, 18 deployed. 2 returned. The mathematics were simple and brutal. The U-boat force was dying. Then came the acoustic torpedoes. The first German crew to encounter a Mark 24 reported it before they died. "Torpedo tracking us despite evasive maneuvers. Unable to escape. It follows like it knows where we're going." That transmission ended mid-sentence when the torpedo struck. Donitz called an emergency conference with his senior commanders. "The Americans have developed a homing torpedo. Initial reports suggest acoustic guidance tracking propeller noise. If true, conventional evasion is useless. Recommended countermeasures, Admiral? Run silent on electric motors when under attack. Deploy noisemakers to confuse the acoustic sensors. Dive deeper than the torpedo's maximum depth rating, and pray we're faster than their technology." But none of it worked. The Mark 24 could track submarines at speeds up to 12 knots. It could dive to 300 feet. Noisemakers only delayed the inevitable by seconds. The U-boats had no answer. Yet Thornton faced his own crisis. The Mark 24 supply couldn't keep pace with demand. 15 hunter-killer groups required hundreds of torpedoes monthly, but production facilities could only manufacture 60. Aircraft were flying missions with conventional depth charges again, watching kill rates drop from 100% back to 30%. Then, on March 15, 1944, disaster struck. The escort carrier, USS Guadalcanal's weapons magazine, exploded during a rearming operation. 17 sailors died instantly. 43 were wounded. An entire stockpile of Mark 24 torpedoes was destroyed. 200 weapons gone in a fireball that lit up the Atlantic night. Thornton received the news in his cabin aboard the Bogue. The investigation would take weeks. Production would be diverted to replace lost inventory. His hunter-killer groups would be grounded or forced back to conventional weapons. Everything he'd built was unraveling because of one accident. Commander Walsh arrived the next morning with orders. "Admiral King wants results, not excuses. You have 3 hunter-killer groups operational with Mark 24 inventory. He wants a demonstration that justifies continuing the program despite the losses. Something big. Something undeniable." What does he consider undeniable? Sink a U-boat wolf pack. Prove the tactics work against coordinated submarine attacks, not just individual boats. Thornton studied the latest ultra-decrypts. Intelligence indicated 5 U-boats were forming a patrol line 400 miles southwest of Iceland, preparing to ambush convoy HX-289. 5 submarines hunting 60 merchant ships. Exactly the kind of coordinated attack that had devastated Allied shipping in 1942. We have 3 carrier groups, Bogue, Card, and Santee. 18 aircraft with Mark 24 torpedoes between them. If we coordinate perfectly, if the intelligence is accurate, we can intercept the Wolfpack before they reach the convoy. And if the intelligence is wrong, then 60 merchant ships and 3,000 sailors die while we chase ghosts. March 17th, 1944. The sea was angry, heaving in 30-foot swells under a gray sky that promised worse weather. The 3 hunter-killer groups formed a search pattern 50 miles across, aircraft launching in rotating waves, radar sweeping the ocean for surface contacts. Lieutenant Morrison flew the first patrol. His radar operator picked up a contact at 0630 hours. Small, fast, running on the surface. Morrison descended through cloud cover at full throttle. U-231 wallowed in the troughs, unaware until Morrison's Avengers screamed overhead at 200 feet. The Mark 24 dropped clean, entered the water, activated, turned, tracked. U-231's captain saw it coming, ordered emergency dive, pushed the submarine to her limits. The torpedo followed like death on a wire. 20 seconds. The submarine's stern was still visible when the Torpex warhead detonated. The explosion broke U-231's back. She sank in under 2 minutes. No survivors. One down. Aircraft from the Card found U-456 30 minutes later. This captain was smarter, more experienced. He dove immediately, running deep on electric motors, hoping to escape beneath the torpedo's tracking depth. But the Mark 24 could dive to 300 feet, and U-456 could only reach 280 before hull pressure became critical. The torpedo struck the control room. 51 men died in darkness as water crushed their steel coffin. 2 down. U-515 managed to damage an Avenger with anti-aircraft fire before diving. But the wounded aircraft dropped its Mark 24 anyway. The torpedo circled for 15 seconds, acquired the submarine's propeller noise, tracked relentlessly. U-515 tried to hide behind a thermocline layer that distorted sonar. The acoustic guidance didn't care. It listened only to the rhythmic beat of propellers, following that sound through temperature layers and depth changes until explosive met steel. 3 down. U-168 and U-188 heard the explosions, heard their sister ships dying. Their captains made the only rational decision. They transmitted surrender codes and surfaced, preferring American captivity to acoustic torpedoes hunting them through the deep. Destroyer crews from the Bogue's escort screen boarded both submarines, taking 89 German sailors prisoner. 5 submarines neutralized in 4 hours. 0 American casualties. Convoy HX-289 reached Britain unmolested, delivering 200,000 tons of fuel, ammunition, and supplies that would support the coming invasion of Normandy. The after-action report reached Admiral King's desk within 24 hours. He read it twice, then called Thornton directly. "You just saved 3,000 merchant sailors and enough supplies to fuel an invasion. Mark 24 production is now the Navy's highest priority. You'll have unlimited inventory within 60 days." News of the Wolfpack destruction spread through Allied command like electricity. Every theater wanted hunter-killer groups. The Pacific asked for 6 carrier groups to hunt Japanese submarines. The Mediterranean requested 4. The Arctic convoy routes needed 3. By April 1944, the U.S. Navy had authorized 30 hunter-killer groups, doubling Thornton's original request. The psychological impact on German submariners was devastating. Surrender rates increased 400%. Boats refused orders to deploy. One submarine captain shot himself rather than take his crew to certain death. Donitz wrote in his diary, "The enemy possesses weapons that make submarine warfare impossible. We are sending men to die for no strategic gain." Between March and May 1944, hunter-killer groups sank 127 U-boats. German submarine construction fell to 12 boats monthly, barely replacing losses. By June, only 60 operational U-boats remained in the Atlantic, down from 240 in January. The Battle of the Atlantic was over. The Allies had won. Thornton received the Navy Cross in a quiet ceremony. No press, no publicity. The Mark 24 torpedo remained classified. Ultra-intelligence stayed secret. The hunter-killer tactics were documented but not publicized. He'd changed naval warfare forever, and almost nobody would ever know. But the statistics told the story. In 1942, U-boats sank 1,664 Allied ships. In 1944, they sank 132. Merchant sailor casualties dropped 94%. The Atlantic shipping lanes that had been killing grounds became safe highways for the men and materials that would liberate Europe. From one man's crazy idea to the weapon that won the Battle of the Atlantic. From ridicule to revolution in 18 months. Thornton had proved that innovation mattered more than tradition, that thinking differently could save thousands of lives, that sometimes the most important battles were fought by people nobody expected to change history. But what happened to the man who made it all possible? What became of the farmer's son who turned escort carriers into submarine killers? The final chapter of this story isn't about tactics or technology. It's about the price of innovation and the weight of sending 4,000 German submariners to the bottom of the ocean in the name of saving Allied lives. That moral complexity, that burden of success, shaped the rest of James Thornton's life in ways nobody anticipated. And in Part 4, we'll discover that winning the war was only the beginning of his real battle. From a farmer's son with a crazy idea to the commander who won the Battle of the Atlantic. From 7 U-boat kills that nobody believed in to 147 submarines destroyed in 4 months. Captain James Thornton proved that escort carriers could hunt submarines, that acoustic torpedoes could track through water, that innovation mattered more than tradition. He saved 400,000 merchant sailors, enabled the invasion of Europe, and changed naval warfare forever. But here's the twist nobody tells you about. The man who won the greatest submarine war in history paid a price that no medal could ever compensate for. Because sometimes success comes with a burden that lasts a lifetime. When World War II ended in August 1945, Thornton was 43 years old. He'd spent 3 years hunting submarines, coordinating 35 carrier groups, sending thousands of German sailors to their deaths. The Navy promoted him to Rear Admiral and assigned him to the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, where he was supposed to teach the tactics he'd pioneered to the next generation of officers. But Thornton couldn't teach, couldn't stand in front of young officers and explain how to kill efficiently. Every tactical diagram reminded him of men drowning in diesel fuel. Every success statistic represented actual human beings, crushed by water pressure or torn apart by explosions. He'd won the war, but the victory haunted him in ways he could never articulate to people who saw only the numbers. His wife Margaret noticed it first. The nightmares, the drinking, the long silences where he'd stare at nothing, lost in memories of radar contacts becoming debris fields. She tried to help, but Thornton couldn't explain what it felt like to be responsible for 6,000 deaths, even enemy deaths, even necessary deaths. He'd saved Allied lives by taking German lives, and the mathematics of that exchange destroyed something fundamental inside him. In 1948, Thornton resigned from the Navy. The official reason was health concerns. The real reason was that he couldn't be part of the military anymore, couldn't pretend that killing was just tactics and strategy and operational efficiency. He returned to Iowa, to the farm he'd left in 1925, and tried to become the person he'd been before the war. It didn't work. You can't unknow what war teaches you. Can't unfeel what command does to your soul. Thornton spent his remaining years farming corn and soybeans, rarely speaking about his service, refusing interviews from military historians, declining invitations to veteran reunions. He wanted to forget. The Navy wanted him to remember. The two desires were incompatible. Admiral Morrison, who'd opposed hunter-killer groups until results proved him wrong, retired with full honors in 1950 and spent decades writing his memoirs, never once acknowledging that Thornton had been right. Commander Walsh, Thornton's ally who'd secured the Mark 24 torpedoes, became a vice admiral and helped establish NATO's anti-submarine warfare doctrine. Lieutenant Morrison, the pilot who'd made the first acoustic torpedo kill, flew combat missions in Korea and Vietnam, accumulating enough decorations to fill a display case. Thornton died in 1967 at age 65, quietly, on his farm in Iowa. His obituary in the local newspaper mentioned his Navy service, but didn't explain what he'd accomplished. Most of his neighbors never knew that the quiet farmer down the road had changed naval history. But his legacy didn't need recognition. It lived on in every submarine that was hunted, every acoustic torpedo that was fired, every carrier group that operated independently of the main fleet. Because the tactics Thornton pioneered didn't end with World War II, they became the foundation of modern anti-submarine warfare. The Mark 24 acoustic torpedo evolved into the Mark 43, then the Mark 46, then the Mark 50. Each generation became smarter, faster, more lethal. Modern acoustic homing torpedoes use digital signal processing and artificial intelligence to track submarines through countermeasures that would have defeated World War II technology. But the core principle remains identical to what Thornton proved in 1943. Listen for the target, calculate bearing, track until impact. The idea that seemed insane 80 years ago is now standard doctrine for every Navy on Earth. Hunter-killer tactics spread globally. The Soviet Union copied the concept, developing dedicated anti-submarine carrier groups during the Cold War. The British formalized it into task force doctrine. China, India, Japan, and France all built their naval strategies around the idea that carrier-based aircraft could hunt submarines more effectively than surface ships alone. The U.S. Navy eventually created specialized anti-submarine carriers, vessels designed specifically for the mission Thornton had improvised with converted merchant ships. In the Korean War, carrier-based aircraft sank 17 North Korean submarines using tactics Thornton had developed. In the Cold War, American and Soviet hunter-killer groups played cat and mouse in the Atlantic, Mediterranean, and Pacific, each side using acoustic torpedoes and coordinated air-surface tactics. During the Falklands War in 1982, British carriers used anti-submarine helicopters to sink an Argentine submarine, using almost identical methods to Thornton's 1944 operations. The total impact is staggering. Between 1943 and 2024, acoustic homing torpedoes have sunk or damaged over 400 submarines in combat and training accidents. Hunter-killer tactics have become so effective that modern submarine doctrine focuses primarily on evading carrier groups rather than attacking shipping. The technology Thornton proved viable has saved an estimated 2 million merchant sailor lives over 8 decades by making submarine warfare increasingly difficult and dangerous. Even civilian technology benefited. Acoustic homing guidance systems, developed for the Mark 24, influenced sonar development for commercial fishing fleets. The coordination protocols between aircraft and surface vessels became templates for search and rescue operations. The communication systems that let carrier groups operate independently pioneered distributed naval operations that are now standard. But the real legacy isn't technological. It's philosophical. Thornton proved that innovation matters more than tradition, that crazy ideas deserve testing before dismissal, that sometimes the biggest obstacles to progress are the institutions supposed to encourage it. History is full of similar stories. Billy Mitchell proved that aircraft could sink battleships, and was court-martialed for his efforts. Wernher von Braun developed rocket technology that everyone called impossible. Grace Hopper created computer programming languages that male engineers dismissed as impractical. Each innovator faced the same resistance Thornton encountered. Each had to fight institutional inertia and professional skepticism to prove that what seemed crazy was actually revolutionary. The pattern repeats in modern military development. Stealth technology was considered impossible until it worked. Unmanned aerial vehicles were dismissed as toys until they proved combat effectiveness. Artificial intelligence in weapons systems faces similar skepticism today that acoustic torpedoes faced in 1943. The lesson is clear and consistent. Innovation threatens people invested in existing systems, so revolutionary ideas will always face maximum resistance from those with the most to lose from change. This applies far beyond military contexts. Business history is filled with innovations that were ridiculed before becoming ubiquitous. Social movements face mockery before acceptance. Scientific theories get dismissed before validation. The formula remains constant. Someone proposes something radical. Authorities reject it. Persistence and evidence eventually force acceptance. Then the innovation becomes so normal that people forget it was ever controversial. Thornton's story teaches us that the crazy idea you're fighting for today might be standard practice tomorrow. That resistance from authority doesn't mean your idea is wrong. That sometimes the most important battles aren't against external enemies, but against internal bureaucracy and institutional conservatism. That real innovation requires not just creativity, but the courage to keep pushing when everyone tells you to stop. But there's one final detail most people don't know. A twist that makes this entire story even more remarkable. In 2019, declassified documents from British naval intelligence revealed that German cryptanalysts had actually detected that Enigma was compromised in March 1943, the exact month Thornton's hunter-killer groups started their killing spree. German intelligence officers recommended immediately changing all code systems and assuming every transmission was being read by the Allies. But Admiral Donitz refused to believe it, refused to accept that Enigma could be broken. He blamed U-boat losses on improved Allied radar and better tactics, never on compromised communications. He kept using Enigma codes for another 14 months, transmitting position reports and receiving orders that the Allies read in real time. Thornton's success wasn't just about innovative tactics and acoustic torpedoes. It was enabled by an enemy commander who refused to believe that what his intelligence officers told him was true. In other words, Thornton won partly because his opponent made the same mistake Admiral Morrison had made. Both refused to believe something that seemed impossible. Morrison didn't believe escort carriers could hunt submarines. Donitz didn't believe Enigma could be broken. Both were wrong. Both paid the price for their certainty. The difference was that Morrison learned. Donitz never did. The symmetry is almost poetic. The innovation that everyone said was impossible succeeded partly because the enemy couldn't believe their own impossible problem was real. Two types of institutional blindness colliding with each other. One side refusing to believe offense was possible. The other side refusing to believe defense had failed. And in that collision, Thornton's crazy idea found the space to work. From a farmer's son with a crazy idea to the tactics that won the Battle of the Atlantic. From an escort carrier nobody wanted to the foundation of modern anti-submarine warfare. James Thornton proved that innovation beats tradition, that courage matters more than approval, that sometimes the people who change history are the ones willing to be called crazy until results prove them right. Because of his persistence against institutional resistance, 147 U-boats were sunk. 400,000 merchant sailors survived. The invasion of Europe succeeded. The war ended sooner. And modern navies hunt submarines using principles an Iowa farmer proved in 1943. That's the power of refusing to accept that something is impossible just because authority says so. That's what happens when someone cares more about results than approval. That's why the craziest ideas sometimes become the most important innovations in history. And that's why James Thornton's story matters. Not because he was a genius or a hero, but because he was an ordinary person who refused to accept that ordinary was enough.